Hello friends! Today we are making a reversible harvesting apron. I've made quite a few of these already for Christmas gifts and such for friends and family, but I decided to make it into a digital pattern. In order to do that, I needed to test that everything was transferred over correctly, so I decided to make a video out of the process. I checked this earlier before printing out all the pages, but this test square should be 1 inch by 1 inch after printing to ensure the pattern isn't changed during the printing process. I should also note that the final pattern is quite different to the one pictured here since I was working off of the first draft. Switching over to fabrics for a moment, these were my options for this project. I'm on a little bit of a fabric buying ban until I work through some of the fabric I already have in my stash, and the only one that I really ended up having enough of was the green one I had fully laid out. This wasn't my favorite pick out of my fabric options. The apron I patterned is roughly inspired by the 1940s basket apron, and I think some of the other choices would have fit this look better if I had enough material to work with, but the fabric I picked worked well enough for the purposes of this project. I ended up using an old mock-up for the smaller pattern pieces since I used my mock-up muslin for the lining material in order to conserve some fabric. After cutting out the pattern pieces, there were definitely a few issues that I noticed right away. The biggest one being the main body piece, which was way shorter than I originally planned. So I went back into the pattern to fix it before cutting the apron body pieces. After everything was cut out, I prepared all the little pieces first so I wouldn't have to switch tracks and finish these in between each step on the main project. I ironed the seam allowance down on the waistband, loops and ties, and stitched everything but the waistband together. The loops and ties needed resizing as well, which I had figured after I cut them out, but I made them up anyway just to really double check and find the sizing that I needed. I repeated these same steps after cutting out the pieces to the correct size off camera. After all the little bits and bobs were finished, I went ahead and zigzag stitched the bottom edge of the apron body so it doesn't unravel when the gathering ties are moving against it in the channel later. To make the channel on the bottom edge, I used a French seam with a 5/8 seam allowance for the first stitch and a 5/8 seam allowance for the second. I forgot to prepare the seam allowance on the sides of the apron before starting on the bottom, so I made a note to fix this in the final pattern instructions. Instead of completely unpicking the bottom, I just unpicked this little corner here to give me enough room to fold over and pin the seam allowance before using a running stitch to secure everything down. Then I went back to finishing the bottom channel. With the bottom finished, I stitched the sides down with a 1/4 seam allowance and moved on to the waistband. I like to pin the waistband in place and stitch all the pieces together in one go instead of taking multiple steps to get it all finished, so I sandwiched the loops on both sides of the apron at the center. It's a little finicky pinning them in place since it's a lot of layers of fabric, so I like to double check that it's all straight before running it under the machine. I also folded the ties in half and pinned them inside the waistband right next to the main body piece so that they can be used on either side of the apron. I stitched just this main section of the waistband first, double checking that both sides were stitched down properly before moving on to sew the rest of the waistband together. While sewing the rest of the waistband, I like to go over the main section one more time just to really reinforce the thread there since it'll be taking most of the tension when the apron is full. With the waistband finished, I used a safety pin to thread the gathering ties through the channel. Once the ties are on both sides of the apron, I popped the seam in the center here and gently tugged it open until I could pull the center of the ties out through the hole. I pulled the center through until both ends were lined up just inside the edge of the apron. I also popped the seam at the edges for the bottom loops. I cut the last loop in half before folding them in half again and putting the raw ends of the loops between the two apron body pieces where I just popped the seams. I stitched this section down thoroughly so the gathering ties and the loops don't rip out when the apron is in use. Finally, I cut the gathering ties in the middle and used a whip stitch to finish the new raw edges. With the project and my notes on what to fix on the official pattern finished, I believe we are now ready to go to the reveal.